All right, so I'm gonna enter presenter mode. Everybody can see, I presume. If not, complain loudly through the chat window or with your mic. I'm Sam Payne, and I live in and work in the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory in Washington State in America. And it's somewhat rural area. It's beautiful, has lots of wheat fields and wine vineyards. I love it. The Department of Energy is the sponsor for our laboratory, which means that a large portion of the research is focused on United States energy topics like biofuels or the electrical grid. I personally am a bioinformatics person, and so I focus on computer science, biology related issues. I also work on human health related issues in addition to the environmental biology related issues. So I thought I'd give a quick outline. I just wanted to talk about the needs for exploring, sharing, and customizing data analysis. As a national laboratory in America, our charter is to be a resource for the nation. So that means that we're highly collaborative and that we work on lots of projects with people inside and out of the laboratory. And so this has driven me as a computer science person to think more generically about like data analysis and collaboration and how we can do better to assist those specific areas. My needs for data analysis, I tried to keep these pretty general because I realized that as a biology person, my biology topics might not be on the forefront of everyone's mind, but data analysis is a very general field and applies to lots of what we do. And I think that these needs speak to people in many different domains. So a very pressing need for us is how to help people find data that supports a hypothesis or a question they have. And alternatively, how to present data to people so that they can just explore and discover and look for patterns. Not necessarily with a specific question in mind, but more open-ended exploratory analysis. We have lots of need to help share analytic results with an appropriate level of provenance so that someone else can interpret my analysis in addition to the pretty picture that was generated for the result. As a computer science person and working with a lot of statisticians, we generate new analytic methods, and so distributing those to different projects is one of the tasks that I think is fairly important and fairly generic. And finally, my experience in working with teams is that there are lots of different roles in teams. Different people come with specific skill sets, and the data analysis ecosystem needs to support all of those skill sets. So some examples to make this a little more concrete. There are some open spending people on the line, so I thought about putting in a couple questions that people might have, both citizens or researchers or governmental municipality organizations, about open budgets. So what is the percentage of London's budget that goes towards education? And people hope that they can find that information, that they can digest it and process it and make a meaningful conclusion based on what's provided in the data to them. A much more complicated question that would involve many skill sets is, do tax revenues or do tax benefits to relocated corporations improve a certain municipality's tax revenue? So you can imagine a team of economists working on this, but you can also imagine some city council people want to know the answer to this question and want to be able to understand the analysis that went into deriving the answer for this. That influences what they would like to do for public policy. Open Trials is another open knowledge tool that I'm familiar with, or an open knowledge project that I'm familiar with, and people might have questions like, does participating in a trial improve my likelihood of survival? In the very broadest sense, or down to a specific disease, is it a good thing for me to participate in a clinical trial? Another question that a funding agency might be involved in, or a health provider, is what percentage of some population, like stage 3 cancer patients, what percentage of those people get involved or have access to clinical trials. My family now lives in the U.S. close to Houston, which has a major cancer center, the MD Anderson Cancer Center. And so people who are close to that have really great access to new cutting-edge clinical trials. And it would, for a funding agency, be really important to know the penetrance, or how broadly they're able to access people through clinical trials. Examples that I deal with every day in biology that I'm going to talk about a little bit today are, what DNA mutations are associated with cancer survival. Cancer is a disease where your DNA in your body has run amok and has many changes. Some of those changes make it easier for you to survive cancer, even though you have it, and some of those changes make it really unlikely. So a follow-on question to that is, if we find an association with certain mutations, can we give someone a pharmacologic drug that will mimic that mutated state? Because that would be a great thing. That's a fairly layered, intense question, but those are the types of questions that people would have, that people would want to research, and all the needs that I talked about in the first slide of being able to explore data, being able to share new analytic results or new analytic methodologies. All of those are important for addressing these questions. Questions about bacterial in your gut is a pretty hot topic in the U.S. Warming permafrost, there's a woman here at PNNL, and that's what she studies. She goes up to Sweden and digs up soil and studies what's happening in warming permafrost. So the first part of addressing these questions is exploring data. For me, I believe that data patterns are easier to see than they are to root out other ways. For a lot of people, visually is the best way to look at data. I spent the last 2 years working with the visual analytics group here, and they call this a visual metaphor. So I put 3 common ones over here on the right side. This, I think as soon as most people look at it, they recognize that this is a trend that has something to do with time. And that information is immediately conveyed because we've been working in it long enough that we recognize it. This is a Venn diagram, and it deals with set overlaps, or how things are similar to each other, how many things are shared. This is a heat map, and talks about similarities at a very detailed level in between different pieces of data. And the beautiful thing about these visual metaphors is that they already begin to convey information that prods us to new questions. So Jaco asked, am I sharing visualizations as open source? And the answer is yes. I'll get to that in just a moment. I'll show you the example of what I'm doing here to explore data. Then the next point is point and click fun. The visual analytic group that I work with says that the visualization that you show people naturally prods new questions in them, and that their interaction with your visualization should answer those questions. So if this is a time series and I see that something happened here, me clicking on or zooming in should automatically start telling me information about what happened at this moment, which led to a downturn, or what is the similarity or the trend over here that leads to an improvement. So those are the types of things that we want to just enable through a visualization. It certainly will be domain specific. It will depend on the type of audience and the type of science or analysis that you're doing. But writing JavaScript is not super hard, and so we can make these visualizations interactive with the entire goal of what I say is promoting exploratory independence. For me, clinical scientists are people I work with on the cancer project, and they're brilliant and have lots of stored knowledge about the disease, but they're not a computer scientist like me. And I don't want to be the bottleneck in their exploring data. I don't want the questions they have to rely on an email or a communication with someone with a computer science degree. I want them to be able to go out and explore on their own. And I believe that visual analytics are a way of promoting that. Clinical scientists are just my little worldview, but if you were dealing with intelligence experts who understand nations, but not necessarily algorithms, it's the same issue. It's the same issue. Also, budget officers and people on city councils. It's all pretty similar. So here's where I'll talk about my tool, Active Data. It's in beta release, meaning that it's a live website and it works, and we're working to publish it. So this is the website. I'll go ahead and make that bigger. So Dan had a question, do heat maps show correlations? I'll show you a heat map in just a second and I'll answer that question specifically. So each of these panels here represents a project that I work on, and we'll talk about the active data user study first. So this is an experiment where we were given 174 tumors, and we were asked to characterize the proteins that are present in these tumors and whether they are highly abundant or not very abundant. And then we were also given, in association with the tumors, people's medical records so that we could try and make correlations or associations between the proteins that are present and their abundance, associate that with clinical outcomes, either survival or recurrence or metastasis, any of these things. So we present data for this in a heat map. And the heat map looks like this. I'll orient you really quickly. Each of these columns in the heat map is a different patient. And so this is one specific patient, and all of the values in the different rows here represent the abundance of a protein in that person's tumor. Red is by convention more abundance, and blue is by convention less abundance. So directly to answer Dan's question, the heat map here does not display correlations yet. It displays the raw values of proteins that everybody has. So this is, in response to Danny, this is a very large heat map. Because we have 175 or 174 patients, that's the size that a clinical trial kind of needs to accommodate. And the number of measurements we make over here is several thousand. If I were to zoom in, you'd see that we have a lot of actual measurements, more than can fit on the page. But JavaScript and D3 takes care of all that for us. So anyway, when we look at this, and to answer Jako's, awesome, we're having a little bit of a fire drill here. I hope that's not too loud coming over the audio. I am safe, and we'll be here. So the heat map, when people see it, shows patterns, and this is yeah, I apologize for that. I did not know this was on the docket for today, but you know, tests rarely are. Anyway, the heat map shows patterns of different individuals and the proteins that they have. So when a clinician looks at this pattern, they can see that this group of patients here, about 11 patients, have some proteins that are in dark red, meaning that they are highly abundant, and they want to know what those proteins are. And we want to just let them click and find that out. So what we do is over here on the heat map, we're able to click, and it just tells us these are all the proteins that you asked about, and these are how they are logically related to each other. The patients, we're displaying data here that has already been grouped by a statistician. The short answer is the columns and the rows are just a simple hierarchical clustering. and that is stewarded by some of our biostatisticians. So in addition to asking questions about what are these proteins, a clinical person might come and ask, tell me about the patients, tell me about the people here, and whether these are good survivors or bad survivors. So I can click on any of these, and that information is presented to someone. And vital status is what a clinician knows means whether someone is deceased or living. And so by clicking on this, they're able to just look carefully and say the selected group has 27 people who are deceased and 27 people who are living. And the other groups have a much higher percentage of people who are deceased. So this would be a group of people who have a better outcome. And then the heat map helps people explore, in the same way I showed a minute ago, what are the proteins that are associated with these people who have a better outcome. So that's all I wanted to show about the heat map tool real quick. There are several other tools. They all display the same basic convention, which is through the visual metaphor, we want to let people zoom, click, drag, poke, and do whatever will be productive to help them explore a little bit more data. All right. So I'm going to move on. The next step is in the logical analysis. Somebody finds something cool and they want to share it. The best thing to do, you know, they want to share what they've done, and they want to share it with enough provenance so that someone else can either check it or that they can stand on the shoulder of giants and improve themselves, improve the analysis result. Looking at this pattern, it reminded me a lot of my life in computer science, that sharing data analysis is like sharing software. And you want to show somebody exactly what you've written. You want to provide enough provenance that they can take it and execute it or build off of it. So it made me think about using version control for data analysis in the same way that we use version control for software engineering. And that's what we're doing here with our tool for active data. Although I didn't show it to you yet, all of the projects are actually repositories on GitHub. So if I come and get my go to my web browser, this is the repository, and it has all the information that the web tool needs in order to display and offer the interaction that people have. Because I'm using a version control system, multiple people can be part of it, it can be federated, and that's really the benefit that we wanted to do, is we wanted to coordinate data analysis in the same way that people writing software can be coordinated. Essential for this is that the repository is self-contained, so all of our data is in the repository, and all of the code to explore the data is also in the repository. So this answers the question earlier about whether this is open source. The choice for whether the data is open source is now not my determination anymore, it's whoever is doing the project. Right? They put their data in the project, and somebody can make it a public open source thing, and it can be forked and shared. Or if it's sensitive in a way that they don't want to share, it's, you know, GitHub offers the ability to have private repositories. Transparency is an important and kind of easy part of using GitHub, meaning when somebody asks, how exactly did I do the tests that produced a result, because all the code is on GitHub, you can just go look. And it removes that barrier, which I love. All right, so the other part of sharing and collaborating is dealing with people who are different. So I don't know how many of you guys are role-playing geeks out there, but everybody is different, and everyone has specific skill sets. And this is how science works too. So my friend John over here is a biochemist who specializes in liver and kidney function. And I'm an informatics and data analysis guy. Over here we have Karen, and she's a PI doing cancer signaling. So all of these people will have a different way that they want to interact with data. And our hope is to enable those many different roles and the different ways that they interact with it. So active data as a tool gives people these visual analytics and coordinates with GitHub. As you would expect, there are different versions of software, different versions of people's data sets, and that's all tracked by GitHub for me. And I just have to make sure that the way our web server interacts with GitHub exposes enough of that to the users. There are also other ways of interacting with it, like if my postdoc Yvette really wants to just interact on statistics code, she can work through RStudio and SourceTree and just work straight with GitHub. And we realize that that's an important way to enable someone with a different skill set. One of the reasons we became involved with Open Knowledge is we were really excited about using tools to either federate or help control access to a live data repository. So the example that we're working up right now with Dan and Paul in the group is in a hospital, people's clinical records are constantly updated. That means that what is listed in a metadata table will change from time to time. And we want to make sure that what is in those tables is accurate and is properly vetted, because people are using that analytic all the time online. So we're working with frictionless data and good tables to help people update the repository in a way that is trusted. So that's an interesting comment from Nanny about the difficulty of open source and open science. I think that's something that is going to be different from country to country. The way that we've tried to deal with this, because in the US there are people who are less open about it. You'll see this in a minute. For example, the security sector in the United States has information that they don't want to share, but they still need data analysis tools. Similarly, a pharmaceutical company has information that they want to share amongst themselves, but not share to the general public. So we've taken a little bit of time to think about how to enable those people who still want to work in teams and want to work in groups, but are not able to make their information or their methods fully public. And that's right here. So when we thought about customizing data analysis, we thought about how to really fully enable anyone to work on it. And so this is kind of a busy slide. I'll walk it through. Our server, the web server, is now a repository on GitHub, and it builds into a Docker image. That means that someone could take that Docker image and host it on their own. Then as a host, they get to invite people to participate, and they get to federate the web access for it, and they're in charge of it. And that gives them the ability to create a team that works in a more constrained environment if they choose. It also has some fabulous opportunity for somebody to fork the repository that contains the server code and make it their own. So I'll walk through a couple of these examples. So custom R analytics. On right here, when we do some tests, I think I showed you one of these. I showed you was a bar graph instead of this box plot. But the data and the code are being drawn from GitHub, and it says which test is being used. So I could have a biostatistician working directly with the data repository to provide new tests. Those new tests in the repository are synced to the web server and then immediately available to users of the web server. So that's one way we want to allow people to do that. And because we're using version control, I can choose to use different version of an analytic code than other people, meaning I could develop independently in the same way that you think about software platforms kind of forking and merging over time. So in order to enable that, we have an API for how software interacts with the web server, which is what are you going to receive as far as data from the web server, and what you should return back to the web server. You should return some results and p-value. You should tell it how it gets plotted. All of this is now in the API that we have. And the last thing is, like I mentioned, the web server itself is a repository, can be changed and customized to a specific project and built into a Docker image and then run as a new web server. That's done by somebody who's a web developer saying, I want a new visualization that you haven't thought of before. And so I'm going to write a new JavaScript file, HTML file. It's going to show things in a new, cool way. That is able for them to create their own Docker image, or they can do a pull request and we can adopt it as part of the main project. But it allows a flexibility now in this ecosystem here where people can take the idea and customize it in any number of ways. And we're really excited about that. That's what we spent the last little bit doing before we met and started working on the Frictionless Data project. So that's all I have, and I appreciate everybody staying through the fire alarm. Junyang Lee and Ryan Wilson are the ones who do the bulk of the work. Katie Cornwall was a summer intern, and she worked a lot on the API for custom biostatistics code. And here's my funding source. So thanks for everybody. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'll type in my email here. And if you wanted to email me specifically, or if you wanted to explore it, I can go back over here and type in the URL for you. So I'm going to mute myself real quick unless anybody has any questions.
Thanks, Sam. That was really great. I really enjoyed that.
The fire alarm just stopped working.
That's pretty funny.
The link does not work. I'm going to check that out because I was just on it.
Error.
Really? Yeah, so I just got on. I will work. Okay. And when you log in, Paul, yeah. When you log in, here I'll log out so everybody can see how logging in works. So you can log in as a guest, or you can use your own personal GitHub login. If you log in under either of those accounts, we have two open exploration projects that everybody can see. And that's one of the ones that I use today. This one is one of the open ones that people can look at, and this one is one of the open ones that people can look at. There are other projects that are open source, but you have to be invited to it. And I can help anybody who wants to with that. You know, we have a share and contact the PI type stuff.
So I had one question. As a sort of open source project that's doing everything in the open on GitHub, do you have a particular way to onboard people? Do you have a particular way of, do you have any sort of ideal sort of like contributions you'd like for active data biology? And can they be from, general users looking to improve the product, or do they have to be from sort of biologists who are working on the same kind of problems you're working on?
So they do not have to be from biologists, although the specific projects we have here are going to be a little more intuitive to someone like that. So if you wanted to come to active data biology on the GitHub, these are all of our data repositories. And this one, which is not quite live yet, this is the server repository. And so we're building up over the last few months tutorial videos and contribution, updates, how we would like people to contribute to either the server or one of the data projects. And I think that's one of the things that makes it a little more nuanced is the server itself is its own project and can be edited and updated, and people can put in things that are specific for them. And then the data that is used by the server is also separate projects.
So can you give an example?
Sorry, go ahead.
Can you give an example of one of the things you'd like contributed?
Sure. So that link right there for Yako was the link to our group or our project on GitHub. So one of the things that would be fun to contribute is right now we only have 3 visualization tools or 3 visualization pieces. Someone could come in and make a new JavaScript HTML visualization that was specific to the need they wanted. Someone could also come in and work on this Canvas code which does recommender systems, and they could write a new or different recommender, which is with data that you found, I would recommend other data.
Cool. Excellent. Great. So Nanny has a question. Are there any public universities that have looked into this platform?
So the answer is yes. I am working with several US-based public universities on specific data projects they have, and I'm trying to build collaborations for the platform itself.
Cool. Excellent. So what has been the sort of like the hardest part about this project, I would say? Because it seems like really well done, it seems very interesting and modular, and you seem to be very fluid in presenting it, and but what has been the sort of like most challenging aspect of it? I mean, that's something I'm curious about.
So one of the, sorry, the fire alarm's back on, which is why I mute in and out. One of the most challenging projects for me is it involved a lot of new web technologies that I wasn't familiar with, so it took a little bit of time to do things. But the thing that we tried to figure out was how we can enable people to do the customizations. And so that took several months of planning and thinking about, how are we going to allow someone to fork the entire server in a way that is productive to both them and us. Although it sounds easy to just, say, well, make a Docker image and let people do it, it meant that we had to change the way our code was structured to make it easier for people to come and branch off of it. Although sharing was part of the initial idea, sharing the server itself was a rather new idea, and so we needed to make it easier for people to understand how they can contribute to changing and developing a server. How the specific web pages interact with each other, all the web services behind in there. All right, well, if there are no more questions, I'd like to thank everyone for participating. Encourage you to contact me with any other thoughts you might have. But I'm really grateful you all were here at whatever time it is where you are.
Cool. Yeah, I'm gonna share this recording with not only the labs on the labs forum, but also, we have this in Open Knowledge. We have this sort of this theoretically active open science working group who might be interested in exactly this kind of thing. Um, Actually, I do have one question. So, has this project resulted in any biologists using the platform to do their data analysis for papers that are either in progress right now or published?
So we have a couple that are in progress, but not any that are published.
Mm-hmm.
The original thing that people really liked about it was just the ease of sharing. And so they would say, can you put my data on there so I can share it with other people?
Mm.
And we're trying to build up the analytic side of it now, because it started off as a visualization tool,
Mm-hmm.
but we're trying to build up the analytic side of it now so that it becomes a more complete ecosystem.
Cool. And actually, in the sharing thing, that's really interesting. So people had data on their computers that they didn't know how to share, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
And they
they
wanted.
had difficulty sharing it in a way that was not banal, just putting it in a spreadsheet and attaching that as a file.
Mhm.
They wanted to give people some sort of better access to their data.
Yeah. So sharing it with a potential visualization attached. Um, do they? I mean, did had. I mean, this is sort of like angled at frictionless data, but like, did they have any sort of like interest in sharing like more general metadata about the sort of the whatever study characteristics there were, or any sort of.
Yeah, so sharing metadata is something particularly awkward for people.
Mhm.
And I think our interaction with frictionless data is going to really enable people to feel a lot better about that.
Yeah.
So Nanny had a question about the closed atmosphere at public universities or health centers in the U.S. So I think it's changing pretty quickly. The U.S. has a lot of concern about personal identifiability, and that is kind of being looked at the same in the same sense as people saying, but we want access to all of that information. And so lots of people both want the information and are worried about potential legal ramifications. I have a friend at Stanford University who says that all of his patients really want openness. And some of the higher levels of clinical administration or university-led lawyers are a little worried about that. But that the patients who are in these clinical trials are, for the majority, totally okay with any level of openness because they see the value of sharing information both for future posterity but also for themselves.
Great, Sam. I actually had another question related to metadata, just for my curiosity. So, setting aside frictionless data, what sort of metadata standards exist for the type of data that you're working with in active data biology?
So for metadata, there are a litany of different ontologies that are bubbling up from a community. And the difficulty with those is that they are always in flux, and that they tend to be yet another solution. So, they may be adopted by a small subset of people, but no real ontologies have come forward and made it truly easy, which is why I like how frictionless data is embedding a functional schema with the data. So although your schema may be slightly different project to project, it's a usable schema, and people can understand how to interact with it.
Cool. Excellent. Great. Thanks. That works. It's helpful. Um, cool. All right. Um, any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Sam Payne, for sharing this, and thank you everyone here and Paul Olivier for joining and asking such insightful questions. Please get out of that burning building, Sam, and be safe. um, and it was really nice to chat. Bye bye.